Then we get this note from leadership one day, and it says, we're experimenting with how to treat COVID, and they had been trying, ECMO and different things, and they were talking about it in the news, like their articles and everyday leadership's talking about we're experimenting on blah blah, and this is working and that's not working. Well, one day they come out with this note that says there is these FiO2 settings on the vent, and that's one of the vitals or one of the monitor things that they record in the record on a vent, and they said the setting was killing patients, and so
Yeah, that's killing
we're sorry,
remdesivir.
and we fixed it,
Yeah,
and
they
so
fucking
we,
use
we
that
learned
shit
our
on
lesson, and that's not going to happen
during
anymore.
AIDS
And
too.
I
It's
was
a
just
toxic
shocked
thing.
by that because I thought, oh my god, that's
It
pretty
created the
much
symptoms that
confirms
they
what I
used to
had
scare
been
people.
Right.
suspecting and what I had
Like some
been
of the other
hearing
drugs they
rumors
gave.
about.
Oh look,
And
it's
then
COVID. And
so
now it's the drugs you're
I
giving
started
people.
asking around to see if anyone of my coworkers had heard that, and they hadn't heard that. So the next day I go to try and pull the article and send it around to everyone in case they missed it, and it wasn't there
The
anymore.
article was
I couldn't
gone.
find it.
Yeah, the ventilator aspect of this, Dr. Artist, who I interviewed about this in general, said the same thing as well. The overlap with the remdesivir administration and the ventilator, as well as a few other aspects, almost, when looked at objectively, are almost designed to lead to this outcome.
Pharma
Dr.
lies
Seidel from
at
New
the
York
moment.
City famously kind of spoke up and called this out, and said, we're not treating this properly. He said it's a medical paradigm that's not correct. Like, he was very clear about what he was seeing, and yet it just all seemed to continue.
Well,
These are the
and
kind of
Gilead applied for a new tech bonus for
Oh, okay, let's
remdesivir.
turn
I
this
didn't
down.
find this out until later. It was actually Dr. Artist that helped me put together what was actually going on, because patients would end up with pulmonary edema, and they were calling it COVID pneumonia. But if
right.
you look at a lung X-ray, and I'm X-ray certified, so I do actually know what I'm looking at when I look at an X-ray. Um, if you look at a pulmonary edema patient right next to a COVID pneumonia patient, it's like almost identical.
Right.
And the way he describes that, and this was happening with patients who were coming in with fluid overload. Well, typically they're going to suspect something like congestive heart failure. That's the first thing they're going to look at. They don't think the kidneys right away, because normally they already know that the patient's in kidney failure. They work their way
Right.
up to kidney failure slowly,
Right.
and so it's sort of expected, like, oh, they missed dialysis, and that's the
Right.
type of fluid overload they're used to seeing. They're not used to seeing patients just walking in with fluid overload in, like, end stage kidney failure. Um, but
See how
the
they
way he
do that? They
describes
bait and
that the
switch
kidneys do regulate
the
fluid, and
symptoms
it can come up through the
and the
diaphragm
causes.
and get into the lungs. I mean, they
They
would call
switch
it,
it.
pleural effusion sometimes, or um, it made perfect sense the way he described that. But in the
Yeah.
hospital, they were just thinking this is the disease process for COVID-19.
That's right. They
They
thought it
didn't
was the disease
suspect,
process for
yeah, they
COVID.
did not put together that the remdesivir, even though they had this protocol of we need to be careful because it says right on it that it can cause kidney fail. It didn't say it
Right.
could cause kidney failure. It said it could cause kidney damage. But
Right.
obviously, I mean, patients were dying within 3 days of being put on this drug, like
Yeah.
clockwork. I
But
mean, they
ima-
would
Exactly.
they
They
would get
died
the
within
COVID
3 days,
19
and then they said, "Oh
diagnosis.
look, that's
They
from
get put
COVID,"
on
and
the
it
protocol.
was from
They get put
remdesivir.
on the vent. They get the
In
remdesivir,
England, they
and
used
they
other
circle the
drugs.
drain. I mean, it was like every single time.
This is the kind of almost willful ignorance that you're highlighting here, is that, right there, imagine being in that position. And yes, I get it that in the mindset, let's just assume that they're honest and we shouldn't be doing that, but that in their mindset, they're looking for some new novel thing and they're trying to understand. But having a study that says the thing you're giving them can cause kidney problems, and then watching almost consistent kidney problems and then just not connecting those dots, that to
Yeah.
me, I don't know how I can make that
I
sound
don't
honest.
understand it either,
No,
because they
it's
said the
because they were
monoclonal antibodies,
doing
they
it
don't
on
really work
purpose. It
that well.
wasn't a
The
mistake.
convalescent plasma, like within a short period of time, they're like, that's not really working that well. So they just went
Coordinated
into
effort.
the remdesivir more. And I just had to keep
Mhm.
thinking, well, is it because of this new tech bonus? Because they get a 20% bonus every time they give this drug.
Yeah. They got a
Right. I
20%
mean, at the
bonus
very
every time
least,
they
you can
gave the
think that
drug.
that is
The
something that
hospitals
drove them
got
to,
30
again,
grand
even
for
assuming
every
that they're
case of
honest, it's still an
COVID.
incentive. And
All
then
up and
I'll
down the
highlight the
line,
New
there
England
was
Journal of
financial
Medicine study
incentives
that
to
most
play
everyone has
along
highlighted
with
that
the
knows this
scam.
story, that shows you before this
All up
process,
and
they
down the
already,
food
if you
chain.
haven't seen this, they tested remdesivir alongside a few other treatments, ZMapp and so on. And if you can see the numbers here, the point is the number of deaths, the total percent
All they
of the
did was
people
co-opt
that took
fucking
remdesivir in
regular
the trial
flu.
was 53%. You know, I just don't know how
Excuse
people
me.
can ignore something like that, you know, but this is the point. A lot of stuff was ignored
Look at
around
those
this. And
numbers.
so all this seems to kind of gather into a big pile of,
53%.
it's hard to consider this not being deliberate, you know, and that's where I'm left with all this. It's almost impossible, as well as the other overlapping of things they chose not to use, like ivermectin and so on. But I just find that really difficult to miss. So if you have any comments on that, go ahead and jump in. Otherwise, I'd like to hear more about the things that you were seeing that you listed off in your discussions, like what's something you said they kind of broadly
this
named
her
sepsis,
book?
but seemed like something more, encephalitis, blood
Yeah.
clots.
So yeah, after they rolled out the vaccine,
Thrill kill,
the
medical
organ
cult.
failure thing, I
Zoe
actually remember
Smith.
seeing an interview. I do have to say that because of what was happening with the ventilators and the remdesivir, I was questioning what was going on. I was trying to look for answers. I didn't know about the alt media, and it was actually finding you and your information that helped me educate myself
ThrillKillMedicalCult.com.
before the vaccines came out. Through, I don't know, I found you on Instagram. Someone commented, and
That's
through
fantastic.
finding that, it like opened up a door to getting
Oh,
alternative
here we go.
information that totally confirmed what was going on in the hospital.
She
when
was
they
a
said
medical
there was
worker, that's
nobody
right. Yeah,
there, and then the vent thing, and then the remdesivir thing. So I was really looking for answers. And when I found that, I started looking into, like you were at the time, the clinical trials and
Let's
the
keep this
stuff
for
going on
sure.
with Moderna and all of that.
The science.
So I educated myself because they don't teach you this in medical school.
Right. They
I have
don't
a friend
teach
that
you
was
that
in
on
medical
purpose
school.
in
She
medical
wasn't
school
looking
so
into
that
this. She was
people
a
don't know
pathologist
this
at the time. She
information.
actually had just finished her
And
residency
they just play
at
along with what they're told.
North Carolina,
Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when the vaccines came out, I had seen an interview with Dr. Dolores Cahill that said, you know, patients might die within a few days, and
Where's that
it
pillow?
you know, might look like organ failure because the spike is going to go and attack themselves, and it's basically going to be an autoimmune thing. And I believe she even said like it might present as sepsis. And it was odd because I did start to notice some symptoms of, or some cases of, they called it sepsis, but this was not like, and normally sepsis is a whole body infection, and you work your way into it. Like most patients don't just show up with sepsis one day. Like you have,
No.
they might have a urinary tract infection or a wound or something, and it goes on for a long time, and then it
Here we go. She
becomes
got a paper
sepsis
bag.
after, you know, not being treated or having a lot of other things going on. It doesn't just happen within an hour and you're septic. That doesn't hardly ever happen. So that was
She's
very
not sure
rare.
about
And
that,
then
but-
the multi-organ failure, that was really the odd thing, because once again, young, healthy people with nothing going on don't just within
Exactly.
an hour and a half
They don't just lose
go
organ
into
function when you're 25
multi-organ
years old and
failure
healthy
and die.
from COVID.
That just
And-
doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
sure, right?
Were these people also being given COVID-19 tests, and what were those results if they were?
So the interesting thing is by then we had been doing PCR testing routinely.
There was no pandemic without the fake PCR tests. That was the biggest scam. The PCR test is not a diagnostic tool for illness. It's a quantitative tool to it was designed to amplify a sample of anything in order to have a big enough sample to test. That's all it does. That's why volleyballs and cantaloupes were testing positive for COVID. The human genome, or the genome of anything in life, has hundreds and hundreds of letters, right, that make up its genome. So what they did with the PCR test is they amplified a chain of letters, like let's say 13 letters in a system, let's say out of 200, and those 13 letters are found, like these genomic signatures are found in all life. Everything has those letters. And so then they would take that and then they would use it improperly by over magnifying them to like 40 or 45 cycles and then saying that's a positive test. It was a complete joke. No PCR test, no pandemic. Dr. Kerry Mullis, the guy who invented the PCR test, was on the record saying it was not a tool for that. And then he conveniently died right before the COVID rollout. How convenient, eh? That the one guy that could have blown the whistle on the whole thing is this removed out of the picture, right? No PCR test, no pandemic. They lied and tricked everybody using that with something that's not even meant to do what they said it was for. It was a complete scam.
On everybody for a good long time, probably, I don't know, 8-9 months, something like that. So when the vaccine came, so they were testing for flu. No one had it. They were testing for RSV. No one had it. Just COVID-19 every time.
Which is abnormal at any point, right?
No, because coronaviruses are in life itself. Coronaviruses are normal. They're everywhere. It's just, and once again, they're only taking a small sample of those letters and then amplifying them and saying, oh, look, that means you're sick. And no, it doesn't. That just means that those letters are in your body. It has no correlation to illness. None whatsoever. None. Zero.
Right. There's usually something that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And also all the flu cases for each year of the COVID lockdowns were magically not counted and replaced by, people die of the flu every year from flu-like symptoms, and those are the end stages of other comorbidities, right? Normal person, if they catch a flu, it's because they got other things going on with their health, and it weakens their immune system, and then they're susceptible, and then they get that, and that's the body repairing itself, making itself stronger. So they stopped counting those cases for COVID and then replaced them with corona cases. And then on top of that, they lied about how many people had it and how dangerous it was. And then they gave people, and then to make it look even worse, they gave all these people toxic drugs and ventilators and all these things to make them die and get sick really quickly. And they scared everybody into like lining up at the fucking centers downtown to get the shot. And now all those people, not all, because some people got safe formulations. Not every formulation was toxic. There were some that were benign and just like saline solution basically. Because if they would have gave everybody that took the shot the harmful mRNA technology, then everybody would have got fucked up. And then it would have really been harder for them to hide it. So what they did is they staggered the dangerous formulations across the planet in different lot numbers, and different lot numbers had different effects. But overall, the majority of the people that took more than one shot are paying the price today. They call it long COVID, and people are getting cancers that come back, and people are getting all sorts of autoimmune issues, neurology, neuropathy, all sorts of shit. Like lifetime sentence for believing the lie.
Yeah, I mean, we never had pandemic level anything, but about what, like 35, I think he said, is basically replication incompetence.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's the
replication incompetence.
From your perspective, one thing I want to point out too is, or at least ask, isn't that the same violation of their guidelines or standards that you were highlighting before to not include that in the codes that you're being sent? I mean, obviously that's supposed to be included, correct? The cycle threshold and the information around it.
No, the code there would just be a code for running the test. It wouldn't even, you can't even, as a medical coder, you can't even code something based on a test result. So it wouldn't be, it mostly just be for charging purposes, just to track that there was a test done. And then in the record, I mean, there would be a diagnosis code maybe based on it.
Okay, well, that's good to know as well. But so the discussion is that the lowering of this very clearly created a situation where, I mean, let's put it this way. In your opinion, to what degree do you feel that this was something that was more so than just a clumsy mistake? And why do you think?
Oh, it wasn't a clumsy mistake by any stretch. No way.
Testing?
Not even close to a clumsy mistake. No. We got documents from the people that are involved with it. They were planning this years in advance. You can go back 10, 20 years and you can see the patents made for this types of technologies. You can see the war games they ran the year before, especially. You go back and you read the documents. What was it called? Part of that. It's the name's escaping me now, but they're. This has been clearly documented and shown to be planned, pre-planned. When it rolled out, all the people involved were already invested in all the key companies. Like the mask makers. Some people invested in the mask. Some people invested in the mRNA. Some people invested in the vaccines themselves, the needles. Like people invested in all aspects, and then all got rich from it. And then there was all the incentives and kickbacks and blah blah blah. It was a grand experiment, beta test to see how far they could push people, what they can get away with, and learn about the effects of the mRNA on a mass scale and all the different formulations. That's what it was about. It had nothing to do with global health and everything to do with medical tyranny and the coming digital control grid that they're going to implement with smart walls and digital ID and everything on one card, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it like the
Specifically,
cycle threshold being altered?
We've got enough whistleblowers that have come out over the last 4 years, doctors and nurses and medical professionals, financial wizards, people in all levels of government have come out and talked about this, and almost nobody hears about it, right? Like, look, there's only how many people watching this guy's
one
show
side
right
versus
now?
the other, the way that they
oh,
used it.
300,
I think it's
400 people?
intentional, 100%.
There should be 400,000
Is
people
that
watching
so?
this. 4
PCR,
million people.
even Carrie Mullis will tell you that the whole point of PCR is not to detect a virus. It
See,
should not
here,
be used to
she's talking about what the PCR test is about here. Listen to this.
detect or to diagnose anything. All it does is amplify
Right.
a particle
Quantitative.
of
It's
DNA.
see, it's not a
basically,
diagnostic
is all
tool.
it does. He says you can find anything in anybody, right?
Right.
It's like, here's an analogy. It's like fucking getting someone to piss in a cup and then like adding water to that piss and then going, look, it's piss water, right? Yeah, he's got piss water or COVID. That's all it was. It was just an amplification of stuff that's already there. It was a complete joke.
So those swabs are collected. They are sent to a lab, and DNA sequence.
And the COVID-19 pathogen was never isolated in a single lab in any country ever. People did Freedom of Information Acts. People were in court suing the governments. In Canada, there was a guy, and and he challenged in court. He said, "Well, show me the proof that there's even a COVID, that this even exists." And they couldn't do it. The government looked around the whole world, checked out like 100 and something countries, and not a single lab had an isolated sample separate that another lab could take and then look at and test to prove that this was a novel pathogen, right? Like, but there was a weaponized strain with the spike protein and all that stuff, which was tied in with the vaccines and all that stuff. But at face value, they basically co-opted the yearly flu and turned it into a boogeyman, scared everybody.
Sequences that had to be sent to CDC.
So they're all not only testing or
Call someone and say who they came into contact with. So it was new that this contact tracing thing happened. And now everyone that you have come in contact with, everyone you work with, anyone you drove by, anyone you've been within 6 feet of, then becomes part of this contact map.
Yeah.
And that really woke me up, because I thought this is highly unusual, and this is supposed to be protected information.
Exactly.
There's all sorts of laws about what kind of information you can share, what kind you can't. I mean, so to have all of these non-patients, they're not even at the hospital, suddenly their names, their addresses, their phone numbers.
Yeah, the contact tracing was another beta test on practicing the global monitoring grid, like the stuff they use in some of the countries already with like China, let's say, social credit score. Like practically in all the major cities there, to go to inside any building, any store, anything, you have to facial recognition or scan your phone or your hand, one of those biometrics to go in any place. Everybody's monitored in the city. They can see who they are from, blocks away on the cameras. And if you jaywalk, you get a social credit score ding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the tracking that they did during COVID was to see who hung out with you, where would people go under stress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're going to also maybe use that for like a future crisis. They'll use that information to help control people even better, right? Because they'll have a better idea of where people go, how they operate, who their circle is, who their friends are, and then once you know how people group themselves, you can collectively control them easier using psychology and rules and laws and fear, and make them do what you want, right? And then it also makes them break up anybody who tries to get together to form resistance and push back and challenge the narratives. That's why they wouldn't let people meet in churches, why they wouldn't let families get together and friends. People couldn't go down to the regular pubs and hang out. Like, they didn't want people collectively talking, because then people would have said, this is bullshit. Let's do something about this. How dare they? So instead, people had to stay home and glued to their, the news and the fucking bullshit. And they'd show image after image of people in hospitals on ventilators and da 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 da, make it seem really, really fucking scary and serious. But it wasn't. Sure, it was for some people, but those people were dying anyways, or were going to get sick anyways. Like life happens, right? Like, that's a normal part of life. People get sick and die every year. It's normal. We didn't have a crisis every year of my life, every winter.
Maybe their email, if that's their contact, is going to
Right.
be sent to the CDC and put in a database.
Right. All that gets put in a
Talking about how
database.
we're going to make sure the blacks get it first, and just stuff like
keeps
that.
jumping
So
ahead
that
every
was
time I
all
pause it.
under
That's weird.
Operation Warp Speed, but this is based on your medical information, the contact with people who had COVID-19.
Now remember, this lady worked in big pharma. She was like a data analyst who tracked all of these stats and features, so she would know firsthand the irregularities that were seen through COVID, and because she had been doing this for years, and this is why she formed this blog and wrote this book, and is going around the world sharing what she knows.
So anytime anyone is in a hospital or code update that was made later, and there's codes for if you've been in contact with someone with COVID-19, there's codes for if you're unvaccinated, there's codes for if you're vaccinated.
Right.
And then they have AI that's built into these programs. Like in medical coding, they do have AI that can do the job of a medical coder for very simple coding for exactly that sort of thing. So it can look at a census or a list of patients or a list of people, and the AI would be able to do this, to look at a list of people and see, who.
So this AI list she's talking about is what they're using in Israel right now to track, to tell their drones and their missiles who to kill. They're just putting names in the AI, and their AI saying, well, this guy's a relative of a guy from 3 generations ago who said fuck Israel, so he must be an enemy. So then they go and kill those people too, and they're using it. It's kind of like robotic autonomous murder by AI, and they're using this in the medical industry as now too, right? And grouping people into these collective groups of like, okay, this guy's a dissenter, this guy's not vaccinated, this guy is XYZ, this guy is vaccinated, blah 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 blah.
Who has this code attached to them, who doesn't? And the AI would be like, well, I don't see this in the information. So information management department where I worked, where we would have to collect certain bits of information and send that to CDC or send that to HHS. So it wasn't abnormal for us to have to grab certain amounts of information every single day and then extrapolate, just certain codes that they're looking for, and then send that to an outside regulatory agency. But with HHS Protect, it was one of the ones that was attached to money. I don't know if that was, I don't think it was Medicare money. It may have been.
She's not
That
sure.
would be
That's
the
why she's rubbing her
easiest way
neck,
to
but-
do it. I don't want to misspeak on that.
I appreciate that. Well, but I think what's interesting, as I understand it, is the codes themselves are ultimately, in at least one way, designed to kind of anonymize, right? So it's not, but yet this seems to be kind of turned around into being the exact
Right.
opposite, using those codes.
Right.
It's-
So like
Exactly.
cancer registries, we're supposed to strip personal information out before. So it's just supposed to be about the diagnosis. It's not about
Right.
the patient. It's just, we have X many people in America and X many people
Right.
of them
Right.
have this kind of cancer. And you can do that across the world. And so it's just a way to track, you know,
Right. So instead of like, yeah,
different
okay.
places have different occurrences of this, you know, it's a way to figure out if there's a problem. It's supposed to be a way to find if there's an indicator of a issue going on, is what you would hope that they would use it for.
Yeah, and yet
You would
now we're in a
hope.
position where it's the exact, you're, I mean, it's obvious we know our government's been cataloging damn near everything we've ever done as much as it can for a long time. This is just one more
Yeah.
aspect of that
No,
relates
they had
to,
meetings. This COVID-19 registry, they had meetings that were documented. I have articles that are cited in my book about how they were talking about, well, we need to get more and more information from people. Like, rather than talking about we should protect their
I
privacy,
wonder when she's going to
we
get
should
more hard
uphold,
or
you know, all these privacy laws.
physical copies of her
It
book
was about
printed
we need
instead
to
of
collect
just
more
the.
and more and more
I think all that's
information.
available now.
And
She
that
sold out
suddenly
her book,
became
but
the
you
norm.
can
So
still
that it
get
was
it
just
online.
one more thing that totally changed
But I like
in
physical books
healthcare with the
myself.
pandemic.
yeah, and I think your overview on this is, I think, absolutely accurate. This is much more than just
it says
due
sold out.
diligence and
Out of
overcompensation to make sure we're safe. And this, we should also highlight, as I know you've discussed, that social contact tracing
The
is just
ebook
one
is-
aspect of, I think, an avenue to get the same information. But let's remember, as Whitney wrote here, Google and Oracle to monitor Americans who get Warp Speed's COVID vaccine for up to 2 years. Now, this was Moncef Slaoui at the time, who was the leader of Operation Warp Speed, Trump's program, and that ultimately
Well, they wanna
he
see
was
if people
very
died
clear about
from it,
this, that this
probably,
was
right?
not because of you, that you were sick, or because this is if you got the shot, the government using Google and Oracle were going to be monitoring you for both efficacy, but also because of looking for, they claim, adverse events. Here's actually the article itself from Wall Street Journal, where it says tracking systems will have to be incredibly precise. This is 2020 to ensure that patients each get 2 doses. That's the first argument. You want to make sure that you get what you're supposed to get, but it goes and to monitor them for adverse effects. And it says Operation Warp Speed has selected the medical distribution company McKesson and cloud operators Google and Oracle to collect and track vaccine
Google
data.
and Oracle,
So most
wow.
Americans are still not even aware that this process was happening, and I argue probably still ongoing, because it kind of got conflated with the idea of contact tracing around whether you were sick. This is anybody
Right.
that got the injections,
Right.
and to your point, arguably probably anybody tangentially
It's
connected.
both.
Tangentially.
Right.
Ooh, there's a good word.
So, and what I find, and another thing that woke me up too, what I find really odd is while they say that, because they were also talking about vaccine passports, and they had, you couldn't fly or you couldn't work if you didn't have a negative PCR test
A tangent.
for
It's
a
not
while.
connected,
So
right?
they
Okay.
were obviously tracking. The whole point was to track the COVID-19 diagnosis, and then the point was to track if people were vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Right.
Well, in 2021, we
Oh,
didn't
this is
have a
hurting to
code
sit
for
like
if
that. I
you
gotta
were
change this
vaccinated
thing.
or unvaccinated yet.
Right.
But they had been working on Operation Warp Speed for a year. So the time to come up with a code for something like pharmacovigilance or a vaccine injury is in the clinical trial stage while they're working on it. That's one of the things that they use this statistical reporting system for, is in the clinical trials. There's sometimes when patients will come to the hospital and they're in a clinical trial, we have to put the clinical trial code and then whatever is their diagnosis that makes them part of the clinical trial on that. And then it gets billed through the trial budget rather than sent through insurance.
Gotta have a better seat
So,
cushion.
I'm sorry, I got off track there.
No, it's okay. That takes me to the point that you were making, is that ultimately you can see that this was done, just like all the rest of it, sort of outside the cycle in a way that was detrimental and ultimately for an interest that doesn't seem to be about helping people at all. And I think that's what all of this kind of seems to be coming back to, is that all these choices were done. And throughout the entire process, the argument being that we're just in so much danger, there's just so much going on, and yet looking back, that even wasn't the truth, but we're done under that guise, when really I can't help but see that every single one of these choices were, it's like, I mean, if you tried to make this as dangerous as possible, I don't think you could have done a better job, you know. And that's kind of how I see this all ending. And I wanted to highlight as well, unless, do you have a comment?
Oh no, I was starting to remember what I was talking about, in that the code for the adverse effect and the I was talking about two different things. That's how I got confused. So we were talking about
all the time.
This vaccinated and unvaccinated being tracked. Well, in 2021, we didn't have that. We had codes for COVID-19, and the code for being vaccinated or unvaccinated I don't think it came out until 2022. And so when patients started to come in with vaccine injuries, there was no way to report it. The code was not there. And it wasn't that they didn't have time to think about it. So to me, this was very incredibly deliberate. I mean, on top of that, they don't educate doctors to even recognize what vaccine injuries would look like.
Right. They don't educate doctors at all. That's so key
someone
about that. They don't teach them what a vaccine injury looks like.
And with an injury, they recognize it as the disease. So if they see someone coming in with sepsis, they recognize it as sepsis. They don't put the two together because they're not educated that way. Right. So that was what helped me, was looking at that information first so that I would recognize that. But it wasn't something I could report. It wasn't being recorded at the time. So they're talking about vaccine passports, and I can't even really tell who's vaccinated or who's not until they volunteer the information. And there's no code for it. There's no way to report it. To me, it seemed entirely controlled from top to bottom, because it's not like they didn't know to track it. They had been tracking they'd been doing the contact tracing thing, and they can't track vaccines, and they're doing them through the drive-through, where there's not going to be the same kind of electronic record system as if someone were to go into a facility of any kind, where they have a computer right there and they can just put everything in the system, and then those systems can talk to each other to make it easier to have this vaccine passport thing. No, instead they send them through a drive-through and they give them a piece of paper, and so we can't tell when the patient comes in if they're vaccinated or not. So they kind of blinded physicians right there too. Right. I mean, because the patient had to be awake enough to tell them. I mean, there was definitely some cases
especially
where
with the older
died
people
before they got to the hospital, and there's no way to know.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's very, looking at this from the potential criminal, when I say potential to be objective, I think it's obviously criminal, but the potential criminal side of this and the intention, you can argue that it's self-serving to make sure that it's impossible to know, because obviously then you can't prove one way or the other. And I think that's an interesting aspect of this, that I genuinely think that going back to like your point, the pharmacovigilance, which by the way, if you don't know, is the term out there watching, the term for the tracking, the part we discussed with Moncef Slaoui, Oracle, and Google, and the tracking of people getting the injections, both for adverse events, but just in general. And I think, this is already happening in a way that didn't necessitate that system, and that's because of other surveillance we have, because of other tracking, possibly even your phone. And I'll actually, to kind of wrap up here, I think one part that is something we shouldn't dismiss, as I know you've talked about as well, is the other aspects of this, the possibilities, I should say. Now, I'm of the mind that I don't think I can prove, I know I can't prove that any of these things are necessarily happening, and that for the podcast being something that might have been in the injection. I have to look for a different something that might have been a part of the injection itself, like one of these, where they had the RFID chip attached to the syringe, not in the shot, that was then used, and that's part, all these different levels of this, or as she highlights, or we discussed with Whitney, exposed warp speed with Whitney Webb, chips, gels, and sensors on the way, and then, well, that's the main point, that these are like the gels themselves that actually have the same kind of smart nanotech kind of concept. And so it's interesting to think about, just as a hypothetical, like maybe they didn't need these tracking systems because of this kind of stuff, or any number of overlaps, because the point is, this is something that directly ties to Moncef Slaoui, Warp Speed themselves, and even the Gates Foundation, very much pushing within the context of this conversation, bioelectrics, vaccine patches, injectable nanotech conversations. This was leader of Operation Warp Speed, is adamant about implantable biosensors. I mean, this is all coming out right along the same conversation. And I just found that very interesting, even just the idea, as what he writes, a eugenicist mindset propelling Operation Warp Speed. You know, the idea that just maybe there's some other reason for that. But anyway, just the hypotheticals, and you can comment on it if you'd like, it's obvious to me and everybody else, I think, with the willingness to be objective, that a lot of what happened here, at the very least, was about experimentation to find out what happens with X, Y, and Z. I also think, as I think you do as well, that it's much, much darker than that. Now, if you'd like to talk about what you think in that regard and, you know, kind of wrap up on some final points, you know, what do you think the darker agenda is here? Why is all this happening, in your opinion?
In my opinion?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people ask me if it's money. And there's definitely an incentive for the hospitals. I think the people in the hospital, the reason why I call it a cult in my book, My Life in the Medical Cult, is that I don't think everyone in there went in there to murder people. They're murdering people for profit, but that's not what they went in there to do. I think there's a lot of people, even in a lot of these government organizations, maybe even in politics, that, you know, they think they're in there doing a good thing, but they have just been totally indoctrinated into thinking the wrong thing. And I think the people behind this,
It's
I mean,
hard to
it's
find
clear
something
the
in
people.
here. I have to look at
I
some other older
looked
stuff.
for the
to find
reason
it.
why I wrote the book was there was obviously something going on, and there's obviously something more than just profit. I mean, yes, the hospitals were intentionally driven into almost bankruptcy and then bailed out with the CARES Act, and then they started to make all this money with all after the CARES Act, and then all the protocols, and it all just worked out marvelously for them. So I thought all of these people who are involved in the
Marvelously.
finances behind what created these codes, and is obviously how it's being tracked, there's something behind this. It's not just money. And so I went down the rabbit hole, and I did find eugenics is behind it. So
Eugenics.
I totally agree with Whitney on that. And I do talk about that in the book, that's ultimately where it comes from. I mean, it goes up to the WHO, it goes up to the
Oh, good.
WEF.
You're too
And
kind. LOL. You're
I don't
too
even, I
kind.
think it ultimately is that eugenics has been rebranded as transhumanism.
Yeah.
And I think the vaccines were
I'm not even
designed
doing it,
to
but thank
harm
you.
people. I think they,
trying.
like you said,
I'm
they were
learning
an
as we
experiment.
go.
I don't know if they were trying to experiment
Doing my best,
on
bro.
how fast they can kill people or how slow they can do it. I mean, that's anyone's guess. To me, I think
Long
the
ways
ultimate
to
goal
go.
isn't money. I think it's control. And I think the agenda with the vaccine is to separate people from their soul. I know that's getting a little spiritual there, but with the personality changes and the mental issues and the I've just heard so many people, even some of the records even mentioned things like, you know, I
learning
feel
every
different
day
anymore. That's not the
Every
same
day.
person.
about it. Getting more comfortable.
Well, I would say that there's nothing that we should shy away from
Etc.
considering, right? I mean, I think at the
I
end of the
hope
day,
to,
what we're talking about is obvious malpractice,
I hope
obvious
to
criminal activity, obvious experimentation,
become
and so we should be considering. I mean, the one point that I always make in this, and I don't think what you said is crazy at all, but I think that what's interesting is the real question in any of these
some
contexts is not whether you think what
health
they're
issues
doing is
which
possible or real, but whether
prevent me
they
from
think it's possible or real, or whether they're willing
doing
to try
it
to find out. And I think that's the
for,
real history
8 hours
around
at a
how the
time,
government and
so I take
governments, but
breaks.
specifically the U.S. government has experimented on its own population
hope to
so
come
many
back.
times it would
Please
blow your
visit.
mind if you truly
Please
understood
visit
it. The one that I've
anytime,
talked about a
bro.
lot is the verifiable reality that they've admitted at least once in the past
Please visit
to experimenting on
anytime.
American
Thanks again.
citizens, whether it was biological or chemical, 239 times without their awareness. Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco is an often cited point because it is publicly acknowledged, but it's rampant. And
Well,
I think
it's coming at us from every angle. It's not just the vaccines. It's in
Right.
the air, it's in the soil, it's in the food, it's everywhere. It's unavoidable.
She's talking
it's
about
the 5G, it's everything.
Yeah,
We're just
there's a
being
whole
attacked
network of things
on
going
every
on.
possible level. There's no way that they actually have our
Excuse me,
best
guys. Hold on a
interest
sec. What's that? Okay.
at heart. That's just not possible.
I
So
I wholeheartedly
Okay.
agree. I just they being the hierarchy.
Otherwise, you can
enslaving
leave
you,
it, and I'll do
governments,
it
the,
when I
the
go next time I
social
go.
engineers, the regulators. I mean, from every possible angle,
Yeah,
it's clear
that's fine. I
that
just
things
mean
are
as
being
far as filling it up.
allowed, like whether we're talking about glyphosate or endocrine disrupting chemicals in general, or fluoride in your water. I mean, it's provable to this day that these things are not just a problem, but are almost intentionally there for clear, dangerous reasons. And I hope people are looking into these things more. And
Yeah,
I'd like to
When
end
you
with
challenge them, they won't back down. That should show you something, that they will challenge you to fight to
I know
keep the
there's
poison in the water. That should tell
exactly.
you
a
something.
bunch of.
Exactly, and that's exactly the
of-
fluoride point that I've made. Is
I'll
that
just let 'em say
it's
it.
recognized that right now you've got the government in court defending the trying to
Get these
fight
guys that
legally
wanna
to keep
sell, like,
something that they've
their
admitted
art
in this court
for
process
new
is hurting
streamers,
you.
and
Like, and that's
know
the
I'm gonna have
reality
to
of the
do that
fluoride
pretty
trial right
soon.
now. It's actually mind blowing. I'd like to end with you're giving a shout out to your upcoming work. Make sure let people know where they can get your book when it comes out, or give the information that's going to be coming out. Make sure you check out her book, because this is I'm looking forward to reading it myself, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that we can't piece out throughout interview, and she'll know this. Again, Zoe Smith, whistleblower, medical coder, somebody who has the inside word on this. As I said in the beginning, I love the way you framed that, sort of the SimCity view of all of these different overlapping agencies. It really does give a good perspective of what your job has allowed you to see. So go ahead and end however you'd like with a shout out to your upcoming work and the book itself.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I'm in post-production right now. I got censored multiple times with Truth Publisher, self-publisher, editor. Yeah, that's a whole big thing. It's been a year-long fight just to do that. So I'm back at it just myself. Having not worked for a few years, I can't do traditional
10,000
publishing
deaths.
because the funding is an issue. So I'm just editing myself, and I'm looking for reviews, and then it should be able to be out later this summer or fall at the very latest. So it's called My Life in the Thrill Kill Medical Cult,
Is this
because I wanted you to understand that they're killing people. And
I don't think cult is too hard a word, quite frankly. I mean, clearly there's a mindset here that is causing people not to be able to see what's right in front of them. So I
well,
think
a
it's
lot of people think that it means like Illuminati, or that I want to get into talking about other kinds of cults. And what I mean is, no, this is, the Rockefeller eugenics-based cult that people have been indoctrinated into with the allopathic medicine, and how that's actually very harmful to people, but they think that it's helpful. And so it's just this weird, you think you're going to the hospital to get well, but actually they're going to keep you sick, sort of a thing. And that's sort of like why it's a
freaky,
cult.
man.
They don't even know that they're in a cult, but that's how it works.
They usually don't, and that's how cults typically are, right? I've made that point many times.
They all
where,
think that's
you know,
why
you
they
look
sell
back
them
at
all
people
doing
that
those
were
dances on
in
the
that moment,
news,
they'll
on the
defend you
thing.
to the
You
death,
see
and
the
later they'll
nurses
look back on some
dancing all over the
documentary,
world.
and they're like, I don't know, I
know,
don't
it was like
know
a
what I
big
was
cult,
doing.
man.
That's usually what people are in that position. It's this, this is why the whole mass psychosis, or what is it, psychosis, or
Formation psychosis.
Mass formation
It's
psychosis.
just an idea.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean.
That's why, as much as that's not meant to kind of remove their accountability, you can
Exactly.
clearly
You
see
don't
some
wanna
level
blame
of that
the
that's happening,
victims.
that people just are falling in, So that's why I really think your work is so important and courageous. And so thank you for what you're doing. And let's make sure we connect again once the book comes out, and reach out for anything else that's happening. Because I think people, make sure you follow her work. I'll make sure to include her information links below, because there'll be some more coming your way. So thanks for being here today.
That's this lady's stuff here.
And as always, everybody out there,
This is her
question
book.
everything. Come to your own conclusions.
Her name is
Stay
Zoe,
vigilant.
spelt with a different ZOWE. That was really good. I'm glad I caught most of that. Oh, here we go. It's my uncle.